The campus queen tripped and fell right in front of me. Out of instinct, I offered to help her to the campus clinic, but she just looked at me with tears welling in her eyes and accused me of losing her $100,000 necklace. I thought it was a misunderstanding. The next day, she showed up at my lecture hall with bodyguards, forcing me to sign a ridiculously inflated compensation agreement that basically amounted to lifelong servitude. Can't pay? Then you'll pay with your life. From that day on, I became her personal slave, enduring endless torture and humiliation. My old friends laughed at me, saying it's what I deserved for punching so far above my weight, for being a creep who got put in his place. I just told myself it was bad luck. But 10 years later, at my parents' funeral, she showed up on the arm of my best friend, Ethan, and threw a paternity test in my face. It was for their child. Your parents' death, she'd said with a sickening smile, was a gift from me to Ethan. And you were just a pawn in our little game. It turned out that everything I had gone through, the decade of misery, was nothing more than a vicious game they played for their own amusement. Utterly destroyed, I threw myself from the roof of a skyscraper. When I opened my eyes again, I was back. Back at the exact moment the campus queen fell in front of me. "Hey, are you okay?" A delicate voice, laced with the perfect amount of concern, cut through the air. I blinked hard, the bright sunlight making me wince. Before me was the university's red running track, surrounding the main quad. A girl in a white sundress was sprawled awkwardly at my feet, her hem smudged with dirt. A trickle of blood oozed from her scraped knee, making her look utterly helpless. Isabella Vance, the queen of campus. Every eye on the quad immediately locked onto me. I could feel their gazes, some admiring her, some jealous of me, others just waiting for the drama to unfold. My heart hammered in my chest, not from excitement, but from a bone-deep terror and a searing hatred. I was reborn. In my past life, this was the exact moment I extended a helping hand. I helped her to the clinic, and in return, she tearfully told everyone that I'd used the opportunity to steal the Vance sapphire from around her neck. I had no way to defend myself. The next day, she cornered me with 4 suited bodyguards and a contract that would have made me her property for life. Can't afford it? Then you'll pay me back with your entire life. For 10 years, I lived worse than a dog. She made me get on my hands and knees and eat leftovers she'd thrown on the floor. She made me wade into the freezing campus fountain in the middle of winter to retrieve a lipstick she'd accidentally dropped. She forced me to stand up in front of the whole student body and confess to being a thief, a loser who was obsessed with her. And my best friend, Ethan Cole, was always there when I hit rock bottom. He'd clap me on the shoulder and say, "Hang in there, man. Just gotta ride it out. You mess with the wrong people." I believed him. I thought it was just my cursed luck that I was born to suffer. Until 10 years later, at my parents' funeral, Isabella, clinging to Ethan's arm, threw that paternity test at me. Her smile, a beautiful, venomous flower. The car crash that killed your parents? That was my gift to Ethan, to celebrate the birth of our son. She laughed. "And you? Oh, you were just a sad little dog we kept around for entertainment. A game." So, my parents' horrific deaths, my decade of humiliation, everything I'd lost, it was all just a sick game for them. I jumped from the 30th floor, consumed by a hopelessness and regret so vast it swallowed me whole. And now I was back at the beginning, seeing me just standing there. A flicker of annoyance crossed Isabella's face, but she quickly replaced it with a pained, on the verge of tears expression. "Hey, my ankle. I think I twisted it. It hurts so much." Her voice was soft and sweet, enough to make any man's heart ache with sympathy. The old me had been completely captivated by that voice. The whispers started around me. "Isn't that Caleb Shaw? What's he doing just standing there?" The campus queen literally fell at his feet. "Seriously, he seems like a quiet guy, but talk about having zero social awareness." I listened to their comments and smiled. Then, under the shocked gaze of everyone present, I lifted my foot and simply stepped over Isabella Vance's fallen form, as if she weren't a beautiful girl in distress, but just a rock in my path. Without a single glance back, I walked straight toward the dining hall. Behind me, a dead silence fell over the quad. It was followed by Isabella's shriek, a sound laced with disbelief and pure, undiluted fury. "Caleb Shaw, you get back here." I didn't stop. I walked faster, as if fleeing the plague itself. The dining hall was buzzing with noise. I got 2 servings of their famous mac and cheese, found a corner table, and started devouring it. It tasted incredible. It was the taste of freedom, the taste of dignity. In my last life, after becoming Isabella's slave, I'd never had a proper, satisfying meal again. She hated the sound of me eating, said my table manners were disgusting. Most of the time, I was left gnawing on cold, stale bread. I was halfway through my meal when a figure sat down across from me. It was Ethan. He was dressed head to toe in designer clothes, his hair perfectly styled, his face a mask of calculated concern mixed with a hint of reproach. Cal, what the hell was that? Isabella fell on the track. And you just walked away? It's all over campus already. Everyone's saying you're a heartless jerk. He casually reached over, snagged a forkful of mac and cheese off my plate, and popped it in his mouth. Do you have any idea who she is? She's a Vance. Her family is the biggest donor to this university. You piss her off, and your life here is over. He'd said the exact same thing to me in my past life. Back then, I was terrified. He was the one who kindly dragged me to apologize to Isabella, which only pushed me deeper into the abyss. I watched him chew the food from my plate, my eyes turning to ice. How's my mac and cheese? Ethan paused, thrown off by the question. It's fine. A little rich, I guess, he said dismissively. I nodded slowly. Then I picked up my tray, and as he watched in stunned silence, I scraped the rest of my food, all of it, into his bowl of tomato soup. The greasy cheese, pasta inside of green beans instantly turned his pristine soup into a bowl of slop. Caleb, what the hell? Are you insane? Ethan shot to his feet, his voice cracking. Students at nearby tables turned to stare. I deliberately pulled a napkin from the dispenser, wiped my mouth, and stood up, looking down at him. You said it was too rich, so don't eat it. And one more thing. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper, just for him. Don't ever call me Cal again. It sounds disgusting coming from you. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, his face a kaleidoscope of red and white. I knew the game had begun. Only this time, I wasn't the prey. Back in my dorm, I had just sat down when the door was kicked open. Isabella stood in the doorway, flanked by the 4 black-suited bodyguards I remembered all too well. She changed into a fiery red mini dress and 10-inch heels. Her face was covered in flawless, aggressive makeup. The fragile, helpless girl from the quad was gone. Caleb Shaw, she said, pointing a finger with a blood-red nail at me, her voice dripping with ice. You publicly humiliated me in front of the entire campus today. So tell me, how do you want to die? My 2 roommates were huddled in the corner, trembling, too scared to even breathe. I acted as if I hadn't seen her. I just opened my laptop and put on my headphones. I'm talking to you. Are you deaf? My complete dismissal of her sent Isabella into a rage. She stormed over and ripped the headphones off my head. The screech of static made me frown. I slowly turned to face her, looking at the beautiful face now twisted with fury. Is there a problem? I asked calmly. A problem? Isabella laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, and you're asking if there's a problem? One of her bodyguards stepped forward, his voice flat and metallic. Kid, get on your knees and apologize to Ms. Vance, or we break your legs. I chuckled. Same old script, same old lines. Get on my knees? I looked at Isabella, my eyes filled with mockery. For what? For your incredible talent at tripping over air. You. Isabella's chest heaved with fury. Or is it for that $100,000 necklace of yours? I deliberately emphasized the words $100,000. Isabella's eyes widened. She hadn't even brought up the necklace yet. How could I possibly know? That was the lie she used to ensnare me last time. In the split second she was stunned, I stood up and advanced on her. Ms. Vance, do you really think money lets you do whatever you want? Do you think everyone is supposed to grovel at your feet and worship you like a queen? With every word, I took another step forward. She was so thrown by my aggression that she actually took a step back. What? What are you doing? A hint of panic crept into her voice. What am I doing? I stopped right in front of her, our faces inches apart. I spoke each word with chilling precision. I'm telling you to cut the crap. I, Caleb Shaw, am not a toy you can play with. And stay the hell away from me. Otherwise, I paused, a cruel smile twisting my lips. You'll regret it. Then I shoved her hard. She stumbled backward, her high heel twisted, and she crashed to the floor in a heap. This time, it was a much harder fall than the one on the quad. Ah, she screamed. The 4 bodyguards started to move. My eyes flashed. I grabbed the stainless steel Yeti tumbler from my desk and hurled it to the floor. Clang! The tumbler dented as it bounced across the concrete. I dare you to try something. I roared, my voice raw with the fury of a man who had already died once. The bodyguards froze. They were just hired muscle. They weren't paid enough to take on a lunatic. Just then, Ethan burst into the room. Cal, calm down. Just apologize to Isabella, he yelled, rushing toward me as if to hold me back, his face a perfect picture of anxiety. I looked at him and laughed. Same old move. Pretend to be the mediator, but really just make me look even more violent and unhinged. Get lost. I snapped a kick into his stomach. He let out a sharp cry and crumpled to the floor, clutching his midsection. "Caleb, you son of a bitch, you hit me," he wheezed, his eyes full of venom. I shot him a cold look, then glanced at the shaken Isabella on the floor. "I told you, stay away from me. Today was just a little warning. If there's a next time," I picked up the dented tumbler, squeezing it in my hand. "I can't guarantee it won't end up embedded in one of your skulls." The entire dorm room was silent. Isabella and Ethan scrambled out of my room. I knew this was just the beginning. They would never let this go. Sure enough, the next day, I received a formal notice of academic probation for unprovoked assault on a fellow student. The Dean of Student Affairs, a man named Mr. Lewis, called me into his office. The subtext of his lecture was clear: apologize to Isabella Vance and Ethan Cole, or the probation would become a suspension, permanently staining my record. My parents were called to the university. They were simple, working-class people who had lived honest lives. They had never been in a situation like this. In the dean's office, they listened with pale faces as he gave them a wildly exaggerated account of my violent behavior. "Mr. Lewis, we're so sorry. It's our fault for not raising him right. We've caused you so much trouble," my dad said, bowing his head repeatedly. "Caleb, apologize to the dean right now. Apologize to your classmates," my mom pleaded, grabbing my arm, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Seeing them so humiliated, so small, felt like a knife twisting in my heart. In my last life, it was because I couldn't bear to see them suffer like this that I had finally caved, walking step by step into the trap Isabella and Ethan had set. "Not this time. I did nothing wrong. I'm not apologizing," I said, my voice calm. "Why are you being so stubborn?" My dad's face flushed with anger. He raised his hand as if to strike me, but it hovered in the air, trembling. The dean sneered from behind his desk. "Mr. Shaw, it seems you still don't recognize the severity of your actions. In that case, the university will have no choice but to place you on indefinite academic probation. This decision will be part of your permanent record and will follow you for the rest of your life." Permanent record. Those two words hung in the air like a death sentence, crushing my parents. My dad swayed on his feet, and I reached out to steady him. I looked at the dean's smug, oily face and said coldly, "Do what you have to do." As we walked out of the office, my mom's tears finally broke free. "Son, what is all this for? We're just ordinary people. We can't afford to make enemies like them. If you just said you were sorry, this would all be over." "Mom," I said, looking her in the eyes, my own gaze unwavering. "Some things can't be over, and some things you can never, ever admit to." They didn't understand. They couldn't possibly know that if I admitted fault this time, I would be walking straight into hell. Over the next few days, I became a campus pariah. People would change direction when they saw me coming. I was the subject of endless whispers. "See him? That's the guy who beat up Ethan Cole and pushed Isabella Vance to the ground. I heard he's got serious anger issues. A total psycho. He crossed the Van Cess and the Coles. He's not going to last long here." Ethan, of course, reveled in it. He and his friends would corner me on my way to class, taunting and mocking me. "Hey, Shaw, get on your knees and call me Daddy, and maybe I'll think about letting this go." Well, look who it is. The campus tough guy. "You look more like a stray dog today." I ignored them completely, treating them like thin air. I knew what they wanted. They were waiting for me to snap, to throw a punch. The second I did, they'd have a reason to get me arrested or expelled. I held back. I was waiting for an opportunity, a chance to destroy them completely. Finally, on the 7th day of my total isolation, it came. That night, I was studying alone in the library. As I was packing up to leave, Ethan and his crew blocked the exit. "Shaw, you've been hiding out pretty well," he said with a smirk. "Tonight, we're going to play a fun new game." He pulled a small cage from behind his back. Inside was a filthy, terrified rat. "Eat it," he said, shoving the cage in my face, his smile utterly vile. "Eat this, and we'll call it even." His friends started jeering, pulling out their phones to record. I stared at the rat squeaking frantically in the cage, my stomach churning. In my past life, I refused. As a result, they stuffed the rat into my bed while I slept. I stared at Ethan's triumphant face. Something about him, about this entire setup, felt wrong. It was too elaborate for a simple bully. It felt personal, planned. A memory had been nagging at me since my rebirth, a detail from my parents' funeral I couldn't quite place. Isabella on Ethan's arm, both of them looking triumphant, and something else, something they wore. My gaze swept over him, searching, my eyes locked on his wrist, but it was bare except for a watch. My heart sank. Was I chasing a ghost? Just as he jeered, Ethan reached up to run a hand through his hair, and in doing so, impatiently pushed up his other sleeve. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. On the inside of his right wrist was a simple red cord, and tied to that cord, almost hidden, was a tiny, silver skull with red gem eyes. He must have thought it was too flashy to wear openly, so he'd hidden it. That was it. I would never forget that skull. They were already together. From the very beginning, my entire life had been a meticulously planned lie. An endless, cold rage boiled up inside me. I looked at Ethan and started to laugh. I laughed so hard tears pricked my eyes. Ethan was unnerved by my reaction. "What are you laughing at? Did you finally snap?" "Yeah." I nodded, my laughter dying. I snapped. Then, to the absolute horror of everyone watching, I reached out and took the cage. "Cal, don't. Don't be an idiot. Put the cage down." Ethan's smugness vanished, replaced by genuine panic. He never thought I'd actually take it. The jeering crowd fell silent, the hands holding up phones beginning to tremble. They wanted to see me humiliated, not watch a live-action episode of Fear Factor. "What's wrong?" I asked, holding the cage up and tilting my head. "You told me to eat it." Getting scared now. I was just joking, man." Sweat beaded on Ethan's forehead. "Put it down, that's disgusting." "A joke." The smile vanished from my face, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. "You turned my life into a joke, and now you're telling me something is disgusting?" I suddenly lifted the cage to my mouth, my fingers fumbling with the latch. "Ah!" A girl in the crowd screamed and stumbled backward. Don't eat it." Ethan was in a full-blown panic now. He lunged forward, trying to grab the cage. If I actually ate a rat in front of all these people, he would forever be known as the psycho who forced his classmate to do it. His reputation would be destroyed. The moment he lunged, I twisted my wrist, smoothly evading his grasp. At the same time, my other hand shot out like a viper and clamped down on his right wrist. The red cord with the silver skull was yanked into the open for everyone to see. "What's this?" I asked, holding his arm up as if I'd discovered a fascinating artifact. The color drained from Ethan's face. It's just a charm." "Let go of me," he hissed, struggling to pull his arm back, but my grip was like iron. "A charm?" I clicked my tongue. "This little skull is pretty detailed. Are those rubies in its eyes? Must have been expensive." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried in the dead-silent library. Every eye was now fixed on that tiny skull. "That's bullshit. It's cheap crap from a street vendor." Ethan yelled, trying to pry my fingers off with his free hand. "Really?" I looked around at the other students, my expression one of pure innocence. "Have any of you ever seen street vendor junk this well-made?" No one said a word. "That's funny," I said, my tone shifting as my eyes found a figure lingering at the edge of the crowd. "Because I think I've seen the exact same one on Isabella Vance's wrist." A collective gasp went through the room. Every single head swiveled in unison to look at Isabella, who had been watching the whole thing unfold with cold amusement. For the first time, a look of pure, unmasked panic flashed across her face. She instinctively tried to hide her hand behind her back, but it was too late. Everyone saw it. On her delicate wrist was a matching red cord, dangling an identical silver skull that glinted with an eerie red light. They were identical. The air in the library solidified. Wasn't Ethan just one of Isabella's many admirers? Hadn't she always acted like she couldn't be bothered with him? Why were they wearing matching, secret couples bracelets? We. Ethan's lips trembled. His mind was a blank. He had no explanation. Isabella's face cycled through shades of red and white. She shot me a look so hateful it could have set me on fire. She couldn't possibly fathom how I knew about her bracelet. I watched their pathetic, cornered expressions, a sick sense of satisfaction washing over me. I finally released Ethan's wrist and dropped the cage to the floor with a loud clatter. The terrified rat inside scurried into a corner. "So, you two were in on this together the whole time," I said, my voice filled with dawning realization, overflowing with hurt and betrayal. "You were setting me up, just to mess with me. Just because I didn't help you on the quad, you decide to ruin my life? First you frame me, then you humiliate my parents, you get me put on probation, and now you're trying to force me to eat a rat. You people are monsters." I choked out, my performance worthy of an Oscar. The other students looked from my devastated face to the guilty, panicked expressions on Ethan and Isabella, and the pieces instantly clicked into place. The crowd's gaze shifted from morbid curiosity to disgust and anger. Holy crap, so that's what was really going on. These two are disgusting. Are they just playing with people's lives? So what if you're rich? Does that give you the right to torture someone like that? The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict. In a matter of seconds, Ethan and Isabella went from ringleaders to villains. They stood trapped in the center of the crowd, skewered by dozens of contemptuous stares, utterly speechless. I knew this was only the first step. The real show was just about to begin. Ethan and Isabella fled. That night, the unofficial campus gossip blog exploded. Massive scandal. Campus queen Isabella Vance and number one simp Ethan Cole, secretly dating, conspired to bully scholarship student Caleb Shaw. The post included clear photos of their matching skull bracelets and a shaky video of my Oscar-worthy performance in the library. It spread like wildfire. WTF? Seriously? I thought Isabella was an ice queen. I knew Caleb didn't seem like a bad guy. He was framed. This couple is sick. Forcing someone to eat a rat? Are they even human? My heart breaks for Caleb. He was just a pawn in their sick game. The narrative had completely flipped. The people who had been whispering behind my back were now offering me words of sympathy. The next day on my way to class, no one avoided my gaze. A few people even came up to me, clapping me on the shoulder. "Hey man, hang in there. We got your back." Dean Lewis called me into his office again, his attitude having done a complete 180. "Caleb, my boy, the university is aware of the situation. We are taking this very seriously, and we will ensure you get the justice you deserve." He was practically beaming at me. "And that academic probation? I've already filed the paperwork to have it expunged from your record. Don't you worry." I watched his chameleon-like change with a cold sneer in my heart. This was the world. When I had nothing, they ground me under their heels. When I had public opinion on my side, they scrambled to kiss my ass. Isabella and Ethan were called in for questioning by the university administration. They looked like death when they came out. They didn't dare harass me openly anymore, but their eyes promised murder. I knew they wouldn't let this go. If they couldn't get to me, they would go after my parents. That's what they did in my last life. The moment I showed the slightest sign of resistance, they attacked my family. My dad's small diner was hit with anonymous complaints to the health department and was forced to shut down. My mom, a cashier at the local supermarket, was framed for stealing and was fired in disgrace. That was how they broke me, piece by piece. I would not let history repeat itself. I immediately called my parents. "Dad, Mom, I need you to close the diner and quit your jobs right now. Come to Riverport. I've rented a new place for you." "Son, what's happened?" my mom asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Nothing's wrong. I just miss you guys," I said, keeping my voice light. "I've been doing a little side business online, and it's taking off. I made some money, and I want you to come live a better life." I couldn't tell them the truth. It would only terrify them. Using the seed money I'd saved from my previous life stock market knowledge, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment near campus and set up a believable story about my e-commerce success. With my parents settled in Riverport, a huge weight lifted from my shoulders, and my foresight paid off. 3 days later, I got a call from our old neighbor. "Caleb, your family's place was attacked. Last night, a bunch of thugs smashed all the windows and spray-painted 'Pay your debts' in big red letters on the wall." I hung up the phone, my eyes turning to ice. "Isabella, Ethan, your methods are as pathetic as ever. Since you like to play, I'll raise the stakes." I didn't call the police. I didn't say a word. I acted as if I knew nothing. That night, I followed Ethan to a downtown bar. I already knew from his loudmouth friends that he was planning on getting drunk there. The stage was set. He was already deep in his cups when I happened to run into him. When he saw me, his eyes turned bloodshot with rage. "Shaw, you son of a bitch. You ruined my life," he screamed, grabbing an empty beer bottle and swinging at my head. I dodged it easily, putting on a show of panic. "Ethan, you're drunk. Calm down," I said, while discreetly starting a voice recording on my phone. "Calm down? I'll calm down when you're dead," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think you won just because of some stupid blog post? This isn't over. I sent some guys to smash up that dump you call a diner yesterday. How'd you like that? Huh? Felt good, didn't it? And I'm just getting started. I'm not just going to smash your diner. I'm going to make your parents get on their knees and beg me for mercy. I'll teach you what happens when you cross Ethan Cole." He bellowed his confession for the whole bar to hear. I watched his maniacal performance, a cold smile touching my lips. The fish had taken a bait. I backed away in terror, then accidentally bumped into a waiter, sending a tray of drinks crashing to the floor. As I was stammering apologies, Ethan charged, brandishing the broken neck of the beer bottle like a dagger. "I'm going to kill you tonight. Help!" I screamed in terror and took off running. Ethan, brandishing the jagged half of a beer bottle, charged after me like a raging bull. The bar erupted into chaos. Screams, the crash of falling tables and chairs, a symphony of panic. I weaved through the crowd, deliberately heading for the most packed areas, yelling at the top of my lungs, "He's trying to kill me. Ethan Cole is trying to kill me." Phones came out, and people started recording. It was exactly what I wanted. After doing 2 chaotic laps around the bar and ensuring the commotion was at its peak, I burst through the front doors and out into the street. Ethan was right behind me. "Shaw, "Get back here, you coward!" he screamed, panting and red-faced. I knew Ethan's parents were dining at the upscale steakhouse just across the road. I'd overheard him arranging it on the phone earlier. My running randomly into the street was timed for their exact departure. A black sedan with a private driver was pulling up to the curb. Perfect. I panicked and ran straight into its path. The tires screeched in protest as the driver slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt just inches from me. I collapsed onto the pavement, my face a mask of pure terror. The driver's door flew open, and a middle-aged man in a tailored suit stormed out, his face livid. But before he could yell at me, the back door opened. A regal, elegantly dressed woman stepped out, Ethan's mother. Her eyes took in the scene, her son holding a broken bottle, me sitting on the ground, and her expression changed instantly. "Ethan, what are you doing? Put that down right now." Seeing his parents, Ethan's drunken rage evaporated. "Dad, he stammered, at a complete loss. Just then, the crowd from the bar spilled out onto the sidewalk surrounding us. "That's him. He was trying to kill that kid with a bottle. It was terrifying. Right in the middle of the bar. Somebody call the cops." Ethan's father, Marcus Cole, a prominent local entrepreneur, saw the flashing lights of the dozens of phones pointed at his son. He heard the rising tide of angry murmurs. His face went dark. He strode over to Ethan and slapped him hard across the face. Crack! The sharp sound silenced the crowd. "You worthless brat. Is this what I taught you?" Marcus Cole was shaking with fury. Ethan just stood there, holding his cheek, completely stunned. I scrambled up from the ground and walked over to Marcus Cole, my voice trembling with fear and remorse. "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have been joking around with Ethan." Marcus looked at me, his expression complicated. He was aware of the feud between his son and me. He had seen the posts on the campus gossip blog. "You're Caleb Shaw?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "Ethan," I said, turning to him, my voice cracking, "I know you hate me, but wasn't smashing up my family's diner enough? Why do you want me dead?" "What did you say?" Marcus whipped his head around to stare at his son. "You smashed up his family's diner?" I didn't," Ethan blurted out, still trying to lie. "I took out my phone and pressed play. I sent some guys to smash up that dump you call a diner yesterday. How'd you like that? Huh? Felt good, didn't it?" Ethan's arrogant, drunken voice echoed clearly from the phone speaker. The proof was undeniable. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Marcus Cole swayed, looking like he was about to have stroke. His entire life, he had built a reputation of respectability, only to have his idiotic son tear it all down, confessing to vandalism and assault, right in the middle of a crowd with their phones out. If this got out, the Cole family name would be ruined. Their company stock would plummet. "You useless fool." Marcus kicked his son, then turned back to me, forcing a smile that was more painful than a grimace. "Caleb, my boy, this is my fault. I failed as a father. Don't you worry. I'll pay for all the damages to your diner, 10 times over, and I'll make sure Ethan publishes a public apology. I'm begging you, son. For my sake, can we please just handle this privately?" He had lowered himself completely, practically pleading with me. I knew he was terrified of me calling the police, of this blowing up any further. I looked at him, then at Ethan and his pale-faced mother. I sneered internally. Privately? In my last life, when you were all driving me to my death, did you ever once think of handling things privately with me? You're scared now? Too late. "Mr. Cole," I said, shaking my head, my eyes red-rimmed. "This isn't about the money. I'm scared. I'm really, really scared. Ethan, he wants to kill me." My voice was quiet, but it hit Marcus Cole like a sledgehammer. Around us, the camera flashes grew brighter as the sirens wailed, growing closer. For assault and criminal mischief, Ethan was taken into custody on the spot. Marcus and his wife tried to intervene, but were firmly pushed aside by an officer. As they put the cuffs on him, he stared back at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so intense it felt like he wanted to devour me whole. As the victim, I went with them to give my statement. At the station, I submitted the audio recording as evidence. With that, the facts that Ethan had orchestrated the vandalism of my family's diner and threatened me with a weapon were set in stone. Marcus Cole called in every favor he had, hiring the best lawyer in the city, but it was no use. I refused to settle. "Officer, I don't want any compensation. All I want is justice," I said in the interview room, my voice firm. "I want him to be punished to the full extent of the law." In the end, with irrefutable evidence against him, Ethan was sentenced to 15 days in the county jail and was left with a permanent criminal record. For a wealthy kid like Ethan, it was an indelible stain. To quell the public outcry, Marcus Cole was forced to issue a public apology in the local paper and paid me 10 times the estimated damages for the diner. a check for $50,000. Holding the money, I felt nothing. The day Ethan was released, he looked gaunt, his eyes dark and menacing, like a snake lying in wait. He didn't dare to confront me openly anymore, but I knew this was far from over. I had won this battle, but they were cancer. I remembered what they did to my parents in my last life, the unleashed dog that bit my mother, the accidental fall that broke my father's arm. They would resort to insidious, deniable attacks to wear me down. I got my parents to safety this time, but I couldn't watch over them 24 hours a day forever. To truly end this, to protect my family for good, I needed overwhelming force. I needed to eradicate the threat completely. After calming my parents and assuring them everything was fine, I walked alone through the night streets. The cold wind bit at my skin, but I felt nothing. My heart was colder than the winter air. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number that, in my previous life, I never had the chance to call. An old, gravelly voice answered on the other end. "Hello, grandfather," I said, taking a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It's me, Caleb." Silence. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. So long I thought he might have hung up. Then, the voice came again, laced with a tremor I almost missed. You finally decided to call me." My grandfather, Donovan Shaw, was a legend in New York City's old money circles. My mother, Catherine, was his only child. Years ago, she had fallen for my father, a penniless artist, and had run away with him, cutting ties with her entire family. For 20 years, she never went back. In my last life, after Isabella and Ethan had destroyed me, I thought about seeking out my grandfather's help, but I had no way of contacting him. It was only after my rebirth, piecing together fragmented memories, that I was able to find this long-forgotten number. "Grandfather, I need your help," I said, getting straight to the point. "Speak." His voice was curt, but it carried an undeniable authority. I told him everything. I told him what the Vance and Cole families had done to me and my parents. Silence again. But this time, I could feel a volcanic rage building on the other end of the line. "I understand," he finally said, his voice low and steady. 3 days. In 3 days, the names Vance and Cole will no longer exist in Riverport." His voice was calm, but sent a shiver down my spine. I knew he wasn't exaggerating. After I hung up, I stood on an overpass, watching the river of headlights below, a storm of emotions churning inside me. Using my grandfather's power was the last thing I wanted to do. It meant reconnecting my mother to the family that had caused her so much pain. But I had no other choice. To deal with rabid dogs, you needed a bigger, meaner dog. Over the next 3 days, the business world of Riverport was thrown into chaos. The Vance family's primary business, real estate development, was suddenly hit with a massive scandal involving shoddy materials and building code violations. All of their projects were shut down, the banks called in their loans, and partners abandoned them overnight. Their stock price hit zero. Billions in value vanished into thin air. The Cole family's import-export company was simultaneously investigated for massive tax evasion and smuggling. Marcus Cole was arrested, and the company's accounts were frozen. Their empire crumbled in an instant. It was as if an invisible hand had reached down and choked the life out of both families. In just 72 hours, they had fallen from the highest echelons of society into the gutter. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. Isabella Vance and Ethan Cole went from being the untouchable elite to social lepers everyone avoided. Their mansions and luxury cars were seized by the court. Their bank accounts were frozen. Ethan was expelled from the university. Isabella managed to avoid expulsion, but she became a walking joke on campus. The crowd of admirers that once followed her everywhere evaporated. She was completely alone. I saw her again in the dining hall. She was wearing a faded, cheap-looking sweatshirt, sitting by herself in a corner, picking at a plate of plain vegetables. When she saw me, her entire body went rigid as she tried to shrink into herself, burying her head lower. I walked straight over and sat down across from her. My own tray was loaded with 2 servings of braised short ribs, sweet and sour pork, and grilled shrimp. "Long time no see," I said with a smile. She didn't speak, but I could see her trembling. "Why aren't you eating any meat?" I picked up a piece of glistening short rib with my fork and waved it in front of her. "Oh, that's right. You probably can't afford it anymore." Her face flushed a deep, painful red. She bit her lip so hard I thought it would bleed. "Caleb." She finally looked up, her eyes shot with broken blood vessels and pure hatred. "Don't get cocky. You think you've won? My father will be out of this mess soon. And when he is, I'm going to make sure you end up dead in a ditch." "Is that so?" My smile widened. "I'm afraid you won't get the chance." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "Did you know? Before your father was arrested, He sold you. To cut a deal and reduce his own sentence, he promised you to a 70-year-old man, one with special tastes. Apparently, the old man has a thing for pretty young girls like you. You're lying. Isabella shrieked, her voice shaking. Am I? I pulled a photo from my pocket and slid it across the table. It was a picture of her father signing a contract with a bloated, leering old man, a sycophantic grin plastered on his face. I recognized the old man from my past life. He was a notorious sadist in Riverport who had a reputation for using young girls until they broke, then paying off their families to make it all go away. Isabella stared at the photo, her face turning ashen, as if she'd been struck by lightning. No, that's impossible. Nothing's impossible, I said, retrieving the photo and calmly eating my food. In his eyes, you were never anything more than an asset to be traded. Just like you saw me as nothing more than a toy to be played with. Isabella, I said, taking a bite of shrimp. This is what they call karma. I watched her, utterly broken and on the verge of a complete breakdown. I felt no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. This wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough. With the Vance and Cole families dealt with, I brought my parents to New York City. My mother stood before the gates of the magnificent Shaw estate, tears streaming down her face, hesitant to step inside the world she had fled 2 decades ago. My grandfather, leaning on his cane, stood waiting in the doorway. His own eyes were red. Catherine, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're home. The resentment and longing of 20 years melted away in a single, tearful embrace. I stood to the side, watching them, my own heart a tangle of complex emotions. After we settled in, my grandfather sat me down for a long talk. He laid out the blueprints of the Shaw family empire before me, a vast collection of companies and assets, and asked what role I wanted to play. Grandfather, I want to start my own company, I said, politely declining his offer. I had no desire to live in the shadow of the Shaw name. I would build my own empire with my own 2 hands. An empire so powerful that no one would ever dare to cross me again. My grandfather looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and admiration. Good, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Spoken like a true Shaw. This family will always have your back. Using the knowledge from my past life and the seed money my grandfather provided, I dove headfirst into the worlds of finance and emerging technology. In just 2 years, the company I founded became a titan in the industry, its value skyrocketing. I became a media sensation, the brilliant young tycoon, the self-made prodigy. Meanwhile, Isabella and Ethan sank deeper into the mire. Marcus Cole was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and the Cole family was officially bankrupt. The shock was too much for Ethan's mother. She had a nervous breakdown and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. To pay for her medical bills, and simply to survive, Ethan took any job he could find. I saw him once during a site visit for one of my new construction projects. He was covered in mud and grime, hauling heavy bags of cement, his skin tanned and leathery from the sun. His eyes were dull and lifeless, the arrogant swagger of his college days long gone. When he saw me, dressed in a tailored suit and surrounded by my executives, he immediately looked down and scurried away, hiding in a corner like a rat. As for Isabella, her father followed through on his deal. He delivered her to that old sadist. I don't know the details of what she went through. All I know is that 6 months later, the old man died of a heart attack in his bed. Isabella, having inherited a substantial portion of his massive fortune, vanished. I thought that was the end of it. I thought our story was finally over and that I could move on with my life. Until one day, my receptionist informed me that a Ms. Vance was here to see me. I walked into the conference room. A woman in a Chanel suit, her makeup immaculate, sat elegantly on the sofa, sipping a cup of coffee. It was Isabella. She had changed. She was more mature, more polished, but there was a new look in her eyes, a disturbing mix of worldly weariness and unhinged obsession. Caleb, it's been a while, she said, smiling as she stood up. What are you doing here? My voice was cold. I'm here to discuss a business proposition, she said. She pulled a file from her Hermes bag and placed it on the table in front of me. I know you're trying to acquire that large parcel of land downtown. As luck would have it, I'm the current owner. My eyes narrowed. That parcel was the cornerstone of my next major project. I had to have it. What do you want? I asked. I don't want anything, she said, stepping closer. She reached out and traced a line on my chest with her finger, her gaze hazy and intense. Except you. Marry me, Caleb, she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. Marry me, and this land, along with my entire fortune, is all yours. I looked at her, a wave of disgust washing over me. In your dreams, I said, pushing her away. She didn't seem offended. She just smiled. Don't be so quick to refuse, Caleb. I know you hate me, and I hate you too. But I also love you. From that very first day, when you stepped right over me on the track, I fell in love with you at that moment. The way you looked at me like I was nothing. It was intoxicating. We're the same, you and I, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We're both crazy. We're both obsessive. Her words sent a chill down my spine. This woman was completely insane. Look at this, she said, pulling something else from her bag and tossing it onto my desk. It was a paternity test. The names on it were Ethan Cole and her child. It was the same one she had shown me at my parents' funeral in my past life. What is this? I demanded. It means, she said, her smile turning cruel and twisted, that you got it all wrong. In our last life, you thought it was me and Ethan playing a game with you. No, you were wrong. The person playing with you was always me. Only me. Ethan, he was just another piece on the board. A dog I used to provoke you. Even your parents' car crash. That was all my doing. Pinning it on Ethan just made the drama that much more delicious. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Does that make you hate me? Does it make you want to kill me? She asked, looking at my enraged face with something like adoration. Go on then. Kill me. Or marry me. We can stand on top of the world together and play games with everyone else. We're a perfect match, Caleb. A match made in hell. I looked at her beautiful, twisted face and finally understood. You can't reason with a madwoman. You can only be madder than she is. All right, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'll marry you. The look of crazed triumph on Isabella's face froze, replaced by utter disbelief. She had likely prepared an arsenal of arguments to persuade me, never imagining I would agree so easily. You're serious? She stammered. Of course. I walked over to her and gently tilted her chin up, my gaze as soft and warm as a summer evening. You were right. We're a perfect match. We both love to play games, don't we? I leaned in, whispering in her ear. From now on, we'll play together. Much bigger games. Isabella trembled with excitement. She stared at me, mesmerized, then pulled me into a desperate kiss. I didn't resist. I kissed her back with a passion that would have fooled anyone. From the outside, we looked like a pair of long-lost lovers, finally reunited. Only I knew that my heart was a cold, barren graveyard. Isabella and I announced our engagement with lightning speed. The news sent shockwaves through New York's business and social circles. No one could understand why I, a rising star, would marry a woman with such a toxic reputation. My grandfather was so furious he nearly had a heart attack. He summoned me to his study and pointed his cane at me, his voice trembling with rage. Are you insane? You're going to marry that venomous creature. Grandfather, don't worry, I said, steadying him. My voice was calm. I'm not insane. I've never been more clear-headed. I'm just taking back what's mine. My way. My grandfather stared at me, and in my eyes he saw something that made him understand. He sighed a long, weary sound and finally relented. Just be careful, son. Our wedding was the most extravagant event of the year. Isabella, in her pristine white gown, smiled like she had conquered the world. She clung to my arm, showing off her ultimate prize to everyone. Ethan was there. He had been invited as the bride's best friend. He stood in the crowd in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, his eyes a mix of jealousy, resentment, and, strangely, relief. He probably thought someone had finally taken the crazy woman off his hands, that he was finally free. Poor fool. He would never know he was just another pawn in my final move. At the reception, Isabella drank heavily. She collapsed into my arms, her eyes hazy with alcohol. Darling, she slurred, I'm so happy. I finally have you. Me too, I murmured, stroking her hair. We'll never be apart again. I carried her to our bridal suite. She was eager, desperate to consummate our union. I smiled and reached into the nightstand, pulling out a pair of silver handcuffs. Sweetheart, I whispered, how about we play a fun little game? Her eyes lit up with a feverish excitement. Oh, darling, yes. Whatever you want. I smiled and snapped one cuff around her wrist. Then I attached the other to the ornate headboard, securing her to the bed. She was completely immobile. You're so creative, darling. She purred, looking at me through heavy-lidded eyes. I just smiled. Then I reached under the bed and dragged out a large, heavy case. I opened it. Inside was my wedding gift to her. Whips, candles, an assortment of instruments I had borrowed from the memories of my past life. All things she had once used on me. The smile on Isabella's face slowly dissolved. She stared at the contents of the case, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Caleb, what? What is this? What is it? I picked up a leather whip, its tip studded with small, sharp barbs. I flicked it through the air, creating a sharp snap. It's a game, of course. I walked to the side of the bed and looked down at her, my smile both tender and terrifying. Sweetheart, our game is just beginning. In our last life, you made me your dog for 10 years. In this one, I'm not going to let you die so quickly. I'm going to make you feel, in meticulous detail, every ounce of pain you ever inflicted on me. 1,000 times over. You know everything. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly white. Yes, I said, gently tracing her cheek with the tip of the whip. I know everything. So are you ready? My beautiful bride. Hell had arrived. I kept Isabella imprisoned in our bridal suite. The multi-million-dollar mansion became her gilded cage. I used every method of torture she had ever used on me, and I added a few of my own. I made her kneel and bark like a dog. I made her eat food I'd thrown on the floor. I left bloody stripes on her skin with the whip, then dripped hot wax onto the open wounds. At first, she cursed and fought back. Then came the tears and the begging. Finally, there was only a hollow, numb despair. Day by day, her spirit crumbled. Her once stunning face became a gaunt, haggard mask, her eyes vacant, like a soulless puppet. Sometimes a flicker of clarity would return, and she would look at me with a terrifying mix of hatred and adoration. Caleb, you're a monster. Takes one to know one, I would reply with a smile. I didn't let her die. I wanted her alive, fully conscious, to experience the endless, hopeless agony she had once designed for me. As for Ethan, I gave him a mid-level management position in my company. I made him watch every single day as I soared to new heights, as I acquired everything he had ever dreamed of. I let him stew in a perpetual state of jealousy and impotence. It was a psychological torture far more exquisite than any physical pain. A year later, Isabella finally snapped. She was completely insane. Sometimes she was lucid, and she would cling to my legs, weeping and begging me to kill her. Other times, she would mistake me for Ethan, hugging me and whispering, "We won, Ethan, we won. Caleb is nothing but a dog." I had her committed to the finest psychiatric hospital in the state. She was placed in the same wing, just a few doors down from Ethan's mother. I never found out what happened when the two women, both destroyed by the same game, finally met. I visited them once. Isabella was curled in a corner of her bed, clutching a pillow and giggling to herself. Ethan's mother sat by the window, endlessly combing her hair, though most of it had already fallen out. The two madwomen, a perfect pair. I liquidated all of Isabella's assets. Most of the money was donated to charity. I kept only one thing, the downtown parcel of land. On that land, I built a massive commercial center, and I named it after my parents. On opening day, I stood on the rooftop of the tallest tower, looking out over the entire city. The debts of 2 lifetimes had finally been settled. I had won, but I didn't feel the elation I expected. There was just a hollow space in my chest. With the fires of vengeance extinguished, only cold ashes remained. I turned and saw my parents and my grandfather standing behind me, smiling. The sun bathed them in a warm, gentle light. Maybe what I had lost was gone forever, but I had protected the people who mattered most. Perhaps that was enough. I walked toward them and took their hands. The road ahead was long, but this time I was going to really live for myself.